My name is Eleanor Briggs, and for most of my life, I believed a well-tended house could keep a family's secrets. Ours sits on a corner lot in Astoria, Oregon, where the streets lean toward the river like they're listening for news from the ships. The front porch is broad and stubborn. The old maple throws half the neighborhood into shade in July. My husband Henry and I moved in the summer after he came home from Vietnam. We painted every room ourselves. We pressed our palms in the fresh concrete step out back and laughed at how silly it felt to leave proof that we'd been here. 50 years passed, like a tide, then a storm, then a tide again. And Henry died before the tomatoes were ready one September. My son Ethan fell into the habit of showing up on Sundays with bagels. His wife, Rachel, would cut flowers from my garden, always too many, always apologizing, and say we should take a cruise before Eleanor gets old. I got old anyway, and when I slipped on the porch one rainy afternoon and broke my hip, the house groaned like it knew a secret was about to be told. The rehab center felt like an airport without flights. People arrived and departed on rolling beds. Nurses wore sneakers that never seemed to scuff. The physical therapist's name was Kira, a cheerful woman with a blonde ponytail and a voice that turned pain into measurable progress. On my third morning there, while I tried to balance with a walker and name 3 vegetables starting with the letter B, someone in the hallway said my last name into a phone. Not Miss Briggs the way staff did, but Briggs Property, the way a stranger does when they're talking about something you own. I didn't turn my head because I'd learned if you looked instead of listened, people started behaving. The woman's voice was low, urgent. No, he says the closing date would be next Friday if the title clears. He got the POA. It's just the HOA documents we're waiting on. There was a pause and a cluck under her breath. I know, Rach, I know, but if we can get her to sign that disclosure, it'll be clean. She kept her voice flat, probably because she thought I was another old lady doing alphabet vegetables. She said Rach again, and I felt something tighten along the line of stitches in my hip. It wasn't pain, although pain was there too. It was the sensation of a floor shifting a fraction of an inch under your feet. Kira congratulated me for standing for 30 seconds without wobbling. I blinked like I'd been staring into the sun and let her guide me back to my chair. "You okay?" she asked. "You look like you just saw a raccoon in the kitchen." "I'm fine," I said. "That happens more than you think." I waited until after lunch. I waited while a volunteer read from a large print book about a widower who learned to make soufflé. I waited until my roommate dozed with her mouth open and the television murmured something cheerful about vacuum attachments. Then I found the nurse's station and asked a question in a voice that sounded like mine but too calm. "Is there someone named Rachel who called for me or called about me?" The nurse was young, freckled, with a pen behind one ear, and a warm kind of efficiency. "Your daughter-in-law?" "She called this morning, yes." "What did she say?" "She asked whether you'd be ready to sign some papers, said it was about home safety and insurance." The nurse's tone changed, like she could tell the room had tilted a few degrees. "Of course," I said, hearing how false it sounded. "Thank you." Another patient rolled by with a tray of Jell-O. I felt myself hang in the hallway like a picture frame that's just been knocked off level. Home safety and insurance, closing date and title, Rach and Choe. Words can be harmless until they shake hands with each other in your head. Back in my room, I found my purse in the bottom drawer, exactly where my son had tucked it the day I arrived. He'd done that soft-voiced fussing men reserve for their mothers when they're trying to feel useful. "We'll take care of everything, Mom. Just focus on getting better." I thanked him then. I meant it. Now I opened my wallet and pulled out the business card I had kept behind my driver's license since the fall after Henry died. Leonard Page, attorney, estate planning, elder law, probate. His office smelled like the same coffee he'd been brewing since 1982. He was the one who stood beside me in the kitchen while I cried into a dish towel and figured out how to turn grief into a binder. "Leonard, it's me," I said when he picked up and my throat tightened on the me. "I think my son is trying to sell my house." He didn't say, "Oh my God," or "That can't be true." He said, "Tell me everything slowly." And I did. And when I finished, he asked if he could come to the rehab center that afternoon. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" I asked, because I wanted him to tell me I was. "No," he said. I think you're acting like a woman who knows her own life." He arrived carrying a canvas bag and a legal pad. He had gray hair now where there had been black. He pulled the curtain between my bed and my roommates and sat. I could smell cheap hand soap and the pilot light in the radiator. He asked if anyone had asked me to sign anything since I arrived. They had. A form about releasing information. A form about the risk of falling. He read what I'd signed. He nodded. Then he reached into the canvas bag and took out a file with my name on the tab. "After Henry died," he said, tapping the paper, "we did a will for you and a durable power of attorney that named Ethan your agent for financial matters. There are safeguards, but it gives him authority in a lot of scenarios. We also did an advance directive for healthcare." "I remember," I said, although I remembered mostly the cookies his paralegal brought and how full of air the office felt after the autumn rain. "We trusted him." "I know," Leonard said softly. "Trust isn't the problem. It's what people do with it." He asked if I'd ever given Ethan the original of the POA. I had. When I had the flu 2 winters ago, Rachel wanted to call the insurance company on my behalf and make sure we're not missing benefits. I told them both exactly where the safe box key was, 3rd drawer in the hutch, taped under the runner, and they brought it to me with relief and a little pride, as if this proved we were a team. Leonard exhaled through his nose. "I'd like to check the county recorder's office and see if any deed has been recorded." "Recorded," I said. It felt like stepping into a foreign language class and recognizing the first phrase. "You think they already did it?" "Maybe. Maybe not. But if Ethan's name appears on anything other than as your agent, we'll need to act fast." He left and returned before dinner. In between, I stared at the ceiling while my roommate watched a man bake a cake on TV and made small noises that meant she wished the cake were here. "They haven't recorded a deed," Leonard said, closing the curtain behind him with a finality that made my chest loosen. "But there is a notice of sale, filed by a real estate agent, listing agreement, signed by Ethan as your agent. They put the house on the market last week. Broker's website says, charming corner lot craftsman, motivated seller, estate condition." I felt that phrase in my bones like a migraine. Motivated seller. "We can revoke the power of attorney," Leonard said, "immediately. We can also send a cease and desist to the agent and the title company so no one proceeds in good faith under the present authority. Do you want to do that?" "What happens to Ethan when I do?" "He becomes a man with fewer bad choices available to him." "What if I'm wrong?" I said. "You're not," Leonard said, without the slightest wobble. "And even if you were, revoking a POA is a reasonable step in your present condition. You're in rehab. The world can wait." "I'd like to revoke it," I said, surprising myself with how steady it came out. "Now." He had the documents ready. I signed. He notarized. He left again, moving faster, and returned with copies of letters already emailed to people whose emails I had never known. Subject lines like urgent, revocation of authority, and notice to cease reliance. He reminded me to keep my phone on in case anyone called pretending to be me. Once he left, I put my face in my hands for the first time that day. An old woman can feel foolish crying when there are people in the room with broken hips and broken hearts, but I did it anyway, silently, the way you cry into a hurricane. When I looked up, my roommate was watching me with her head tilted like a bird. "You need a cookie?" she asked. "I need a time machine," I said. "You can have my cookie," she said. "The world already took too many of mine." Ethan came at visiting hours with Rachel in tow and a big paper bag from a coffee shop with my favorite lemon bar on top. He smelled like winter laundry and stale coffee. He kissed my hair and told me I looked good. He asked about physical therapy and did not mention houses or titles or closing dates. Rachel stood by the window and took photos of the sunset as if she had just discovered that day and wanted to remember it forever. "How are things at the house?" I asked as lightly as I could. "Oh, we're making sure everything's in order," Ethan said with the bland tone of a weather report. "What does that mean?" "It means we're taking care of you," Rachel said brightly, pivoting. "We cleaned the pantry. I tossed the expired spices. We found some old photo albums. I set them aside so we can go through them when you get back, okay?" "Okay," I said. "Where did you put them?" "In the garage," she said too quickly. "On the workbench." I pictured the garage as it had been last I saw it. The workbench, rough with old varnish, the pegboard holding Henry's wrenches like a set of teeth, the freezer humming that tired tune it always sang when it needed defrosting. I imagined photo albums stacked where sawdust used to rest, imagined rain if the roof leaked again. "Did you bring any papers for me to sign?" I asked. And Rachel's eyes clicked. Just that little movement people mistake for a blink. "You know what?" she said, rummaging in her purse. "There were a couple of Medicare forms, but I left them on the counter. I can bring them tomorrow." "You can email them to Leonard," I said. "He's handling my paperwork." The room tightened like a violin string. Ethan's jaw moved. Rachel produced a smile with a seam down the middle. "Of course," she said. "That's great. We love Leonard." "We like Leonard," Ethan said. "You love Rachel," I said to Ethan, because it seemed important to say something true. He looked relieved. "I do." "They said something about a closing date at the nurse's station today," I said, and watched the air change. "Next Friday, if the title clears." Rachel looked at my hands. Ethan looked at the floor. "You misheard," he said, the way a man reaches for an umbrella after his suit has already soaked through. "You would be surprised what I've heard in this life," I said. Ethan opened his mouth. He closed it. He found his father's sigh somewhere in his chest and used it. "Mom," he said, "it's not what you think. I think you listed my house and you plan to sell it." "We listed it," he said softly, and I respected the honesty of that, however small. "We didn't plan to do anything without making sure you had the best care." "Best care where?" "Wherever you needed," Rachel said, her smile sliding. "If we put the money into a single premium annuity, you'd have guaranteed." "Stop," I said. I wasn't angry yet. That would come like a storm over the river. I was simply refusing to be sold something in my own room. "Leonard revoked the power of attorney today." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "And he notified your friends at the title company." "Mom," Rachel half whispered, like we were in church and I'd said a vulgar word. "Rachel," I said, "I grew up in a neighborhood where people borrowed sugar and returned the bag full. We help each other. We don't help ourselves to each other." Ethan's eyes went wet and then mean for a heartbeat. I knew those eyes better than my own, because I had been there when those eyes first learned what it meant to want. He rubbed his face like he could press himself back to that kid. "We didn't mean," he started. "You meant," I said gently, and I put my hand over his knuckles the way I used to when he lied about the cookie jar. "Sometimes meaning and doing look different, son, but this time they look exactly the same." They left with the lemon bar uneaten. Rachel took her photos of the sky and put them somewhere pretty. Ethan put his hands in his pockets and kept them there all night. I slept like I was holding a fragile cup in a thunderstorm. The next morning, I can't explain it exactly, but I woke up feeling like I had turned into my own set of keys. A woman in a hospital gown can feel powerful if she decides the gown is just temporary clothing for a permanent spine. Leonard came at 10 with a question I hadn't asked myself. "Do you want to keep living alone in that house, or do you want the house to keep living for you?" "I don't understand," I said. "Henry told me once," Leonard said, settling into the chair like he planned to tell the truth for a while, "that he loved that house because it was stubborn. He said, it's like it knows we're small and it can carry us a little while. Maybe it's time to turn that around. Make the house carry what matters to you. What matters to me, you tell me." I thought of children crossing streets in December wearing jackets too thin. I thought of the widow down on 15th who'd been scared to call the roofer because she didn't want to be talked to like a child. I thought of the maple tree and the way teenagers sat under it in the summer, not because they needed shade, but because they needed a place where no one asked them what they planned to do with their lives every 10 minutes. I thought of Henry's hands. I thought of mine. "I don't want to sell it," I said. "Not to feed someone else's idea of my future, but I also don't want it to die with me." "Then we take your house and we turn it into a promise," Leonard said simply. "We put it into a trust in your name with a charitable remainder. There are a lot of ways to do it. You keep a life estate, full control while you're alive, and when you're gone, it becomes what you say it should be." "What should it be?" I asked, and then my mouth decided to answer before my fear could. A place where older people and kids teach each other how to be human. A garden where you have to learn something before you pick a tomato. a fund that pays for a lawyer for anyone over 65 who thinks their own family is setting a trap. Leonard grinned. He rarely grins. We can do that. We'll call it the Briggs Dignity Fund. The garden can be the Maple Learning Garden. I'll make calls. I know a man at the Community Foundation who will pick up my call faster than he should. That afternoon, while Kira taught me how to get out of bed without making a noise like furniture being dragged, Leonard filed paperwork to create the Eleanor M. Briggs Living Trust with charitable remainder provisions and a reserved life estate. He recorded a memorandum of trust interest against my property. He sent a lawyerly letter to the real estate broker with the phrases, lack of authority and tortious interference, and report to professional standards board threaded through like beads. He froze accounts where Rachel was a helper. He asked the bank to flag the file. No agent, no exceptions, no sweet voices. He did all of this with the kind of patient speed that makes you want to cry. I did not cry. I watched the maple tree in my mind and felt the leaves lift. The calls came a day later, like an afternoon thunderstorm. The broker called Leonard. Leonard did not blink. Rachel called the rehab center and asked a nurse to put me on. I did not blink. Ethan called and left a message that said, "Mom, we need to talk right now, please," in a voice I could feel between my shoulder blades. When he arrived that evening, he stood at the foot of my bed with his hands empty. He looked like a boy waiting to be chosen for a team that had already been picked. "You blindsided us," he said. His mouth choosing the words his shame wouldn't. "No," I said. "You put a blindfold on me and told me to trust you. We weren't going to take your money. But you were going to take my home. Just sell it," he said, "to help with your care." "You mean to help with your plans," I said, and he flinched, which told me more than any confession would have. "What was the plan, Ethan? Tell me the truth." He sat. The chair made a noise like a scold. "Rachel found a place in Fort Lauderdale," he said. "Her parents are there part-time. It was a good opportunity. Interest rates were down for 5 minutes. We thought if we moved fast—" "You thought if you moved fast, I wouldn't see you," I said. "I thought if we made this easy, we wouldn't have to argue about all of this. About whether your mother is a person or a problem," I said. He covered his eyes with his hand. This time, he did not sound like a man or a boy or my son. He sounded like someone who had dragged his conscience into a corner and asked it to be quiet. "I feel sick," he said. "That's a good sign," I said. "Your body remembers what is true." Rachel entered 5 minutes later with roses that still had the grocery store sleeve on them. She nursed the roses as if the problem were thirst. She talked about miscommunication and panic and timelines. She said she had been the only one taking care of her father when he had a heart attack last year. She said if we put everything in one account, we could all see it. She said Leonard was old school, as if ethics had an expiration date. I listened. Listening is a habit that becomes a hobby when you've spent your life grading papers and attending committee meetings that could have been emails. When she was done, I waited, then used the voice I had kept for assemblies and emergencies and my own heart when it tried to convince me to be small. "This is not miscommunication," I said. "This is miscalculation. You calculated I would be soft, and I calculated that you had forgotten who I am." She gaped in a way that would have embarrassed me at another time in my life, but I had been embarrassed enough in this one. We were trying to help. You were trying to help yourselves to my house," I said. "I would have helped you if you asked, but you didn't ask. You decided. There's a difference." They left. The roses drooped. Kira came in and raised an eyebrow at the floral carnage. "You want me to dispose of those?" she asked. "No," I said. "Leave them. Let them learn gravity." The closing was scheduled for Friday at 10 a.m. at Harbor Title, a brick building with fake colonial columns, where we had signed paperwork when we paid off the mortgage 20 years ago. If I had been a different sort of woman, I would have avoided the scene. Let the letters do their work. Let the world make a tidy shrug and a small apology. But my surgeon had cleared me to leave for an hour in a wheelchair if I promised to ice afterward, and I wanted my eyes to see what my spine had done. Leonard wheeled me into the lobby at 9:58. The receptionist looked at me like a woman in a documentary who had just shown up to speak truth to a camera. Ethan stood near the water cooler. Rachel stood near him, scowling as if someone had switched her coffee for broth. The broker, slick hair, bright tie, hummed with that real estate agent energy that suggests every human interaction is a transaction waiting for the right handshake. When they saw me, their faces did what faces do when they notice an earthquake approaching on wheels. They lied and then told the truth. Rachel's mouth opened. Ethan took a step. The broker tapped at his phone with knitted eyebrows like maybe he could text his way out of this. Leonard set my brakes and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, the way a friend does when he is both anchor and witness. The title officer came out with a folder and a smile that had seen things. "We did receive a notice from council," she said carefully, her eyes moving among us like she was teaching kindergarten. "We, of course, need to make sure we have clear authority before proceeding." Rachel leaned forward. "We have a power of attorney," she said, holding up a paper like a talisman. "Signed and notarized." "Revoked," Leonard said, "yesterday." "You can't just—" the broker began. "Recordings were made with the county this morning," Leonard said. "A memorandum of trust interest, a revocation of agency, a notice of rescission of listing authorization." He said the words like he was unspooling a sail. The title officer cleared her throat. "Without the principal present giving contemporaneous consent, we cannot accept the POA," she said. "And under the circumstances, we won't." "I'm the principal," I said, smiling politely at Rachel as if she were a woman in line at the grocery store trying to pay with expired coupons. Rachel whipped toward Ethan. "I told you we should have gotten this done last week," she hissed, and the sentence sat between them like a person who couldn't get comfortable no matter which chair she chose. I looked at my son. He stared at the wall behind me as if someone had written there the life he thought he was meant to have. I took a breath that tasted like dust and peppermint, the way the office smelled when Henry and I had signed the final mortgage papers, our fingers ink-smudged, our faces stupid with relief. "Ethan," I said, and he looked at me. Finally, those same eyes I had wiped with my thumb when he skinned his knee on the driveway. "You can be the man I raised, or you can be the man you borrowed. Decide." He lowered himself into a chair the way a man lowers himself into his own story. He looked at Rachel. He looked at Leonard. He looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. Not a flourish, not a bargain, just the phrase like a hinge on a door that had stuck all summer. "I accept your apology," I said, "and I'm going to insist on consequences." Rachel laughed without humor. "Consequences for not wanting your mother to rot away in a too-big house?" "For attempting to profit from your mother's trust," I said. "The two are not the same." The title officer stood there, the file in her hands, looking like a person who had learned something without ever wanting to. "Our office won't be proceeding with this closing," she said, clearing her throat again. "I hope you all work things out." They wanted me to leave then. I did not. I wanted to say what I had come to say. I turned my chair so I faced my son and his wife and the man who had reduced my home to a set of bullet points and square footage. "I used to believe my house could keep secrets," I said, "but houses only hold what we put in them. I'm going to put something in mine you can't sell." They didn't understand yet. They would. I explained the trust with a quiet pride that felt like the first day of school in a year when you liked your shoes. When I die, the house becomes the Maple Learning Garden and the Briggs Dignity Fund. It will pay for lawyers who answer the phone when people like me call. It will pay for benches kids sit on while they decide who they are. It will pay for a full-time staff member who knows how to talk to people who have been told to sit down all their lives and finally want to stand. "Mom," Ethan said softly, like he was testing the word to see if it still belonged to him. "Do I get to be part of it?" "If you show me with your feet," I said. "Volunteer there for a year. Learn the names of people whose names you didn't want to learn. Take a class on elder law at the community college. Pay for it yourself." Rachel started to protest and then remembered how many doors had just closed behind her without making a sound. "And me?" she asked, some steel returning to her voice whether she liked it or not. "You can apologize without asking for a discount," I said, "and you can volunteer twice a week. And when you accept invitations to dinner with your friends, you can tell them what you did, not to humiliate yourself. Humiliation is useless, but to prevent 3 other people from thinking a sick parent is a loophole instead of a human. She looked like she might throw the roses at me if she had brought them. She looked like someone who had just run a half marathon in heels no one had asked her to wear. She looked like the girl she had once been, who really did sit beside her father when he had been weak and scared and tried to carry more than she could. It is hard to hate someone when you decide to see the things they love. "I'll think about it," she said. "No," I said. "You'll do it or you won't. Thinking is what got you here." We left. Leonard wheeled me down the ramp into a day that smelled like wet bark. I leaned my head back and watched a slice of blue open between 2 clouds. It felt like the sky had decided to show me the inside of my own chest. "I want to go home," I said. "You sure?" Leonard asked. "I'm sure." Kira didn't like it, but she signed off because she had watched me get stronger when no one was looking. She said I could try 2 nights at home with a home health aide, and she gave me a list of exercises and a look that said, "Don't make me come find you. I promise not to climb ladders." She laughed the way a person laughs when they believe you and also know you. When we pulled up to the house, the maple threw its familiar lace across the windshield. A for sale sign had been yanked up, leaving a bruise of dirt in the lawn. The front walk was sprinkled with cedar needles and swept in a half-hearted way. The mailbox held a postcard from my niece in Boise and a flyer for a new faux place down on Commercial. Leonard insisted on carrying me over the threshold, and we both pretended he was much younger. And I was lighter, and the house didn't creak like it was telling a joke at our expense. Everything in the living room looked like me except for the pile of Goodwill bags near the door. Rachel's handwriting on masking tape read linens and frames and Henry's sweaters. I felt a heat that came from a place lower than outrage and higher than the knee. I went to the kitchen and pressed my fingers into the groove on the counter near the stove, where Henry had once mismeasured a board and swore quietly about the universe. The phone rang. The caller ID said Astoria Daily Times. I let it ring twice more before answering. Old habits. "Miss Briggs, this is Allison Chen. I'm a reporter. I heard there was a situation today at Harbor Title." "Did you?" I said, my mouth remembering how to purse without looking mean. "We're doing a series about elder financial exploitation," she said. "Would you be willing to talk?" I should have said no. I should have said I needed to rest. I should have said my lawyer would handle it. But I had spent a lifetime telling the truth before it dried into a myth. "I'll be willing," I said, "if you spell my name right, and if you use the words dignity and law in the same sentence." She came with a notebook and respectful shoes. She sat at my kitchen table like a person who knows she is in the presence of a story that will make other stories possible. I told her everything from the first time Rachel took flowers too generously to the last time I let a person wise me out of my own life. "That's quite a quote," she said, when I said the thing about houses holding only what we put in them. "Do you want it on the record?" "I do," I said, "if it helps someone call their Leonard." The article ran on Sunday with a photo of me leaning against the maple, like the tree was old enough to be my brother. The headline was more dramatic than necessary, but not false. People I had not spoken to since Henry's funeral left casseroles. The widow from 15th brought me a pie and a story about her son, who tried something similar after I fell in the shower. A man I did not know left a note that said, "Thank you. I worked at Harbor Title 20 years. I've seen worse. I'm glad not to see it today." Ethan stopped by on Tuesday without Rachel. He wore a sweatshirt I had bought him in college and a face that did not know how to hold itself. He sat in Henry's chair and looked at his hands like they were strangers he needed to introduce to me one by one. "I signed up to volunteer," he said. "Where?" "At the food pantry and at that legal aid clinic in the church basement." "Good," I said. He looked at me. And for a strange instant, I saw my father in him, the stoic bone and the funny mouth. "I'm sorry," he said again, not like a hinge this time, but like a key that finally turned. "I know," I said, "it'll take time. What made you decide to keep the house like this? To make it for other people?" I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because laughter is the only true punctuation for a life refused. "When your father died," I said, "people kept bringing me plants. I killed half of them because I watered them too much. That's how grief works. Too much of what was good, drowning the roots. The ones that survived were the ones I left alone long enough to learn what they needed. Maybe the house is like that. Maybe people are like that. He nodded, and I saw something release in him. He told me he and Rachel had fought so loud that the upstairs neighbor had knocked on the ceiling with a broom handle. He told me he had called a therapist. He told me he had not told anyone at work because shame is an odd sort of privacy. Tell one person you trust, I said, or trust will be the one thing you don't practice. Rachel texted me 2 days later. Can I come by? Just me. I hesitated. My life had been full of women I knew immediately, and women I had to learn. Rachel had never been either. She had always been performance first, sincerity later. I told her to come at 3. She arrived with her hair in a ponytail and no makeup, which is another kind of makeup. She sat on the edge of my sofa and put her hands on her knees, like a student ready to say privately what she would never say in class. I'm sorry, she said. The words were like something she'd studied phonetically. I was scared. Of what? I asked. Of becoming the person I was when I had nothing, she said. And I heard the truth underneath the sentence. The father who rationed affection. The mother who taught her that love was a transaction. The apartment where 4 things broke in 1 week and the landlord fixed none of them. Your house was, she stopped. An answer, I said. A shortcut, she corrected, with more spine than I knew she had. I know it now, and I'm ashamed that I didn't see you clearly while I was looking at what you had. We sat quietly for a minute. The heater clicked 3 times. A car passed with bass so low it rattled the cups. She didn't rush to fill the silence, which struck me as progress. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Not for Ethan, for you. Respect, I said, and your absence when you can't provide it. That's fair, she said, not bristling, not bending. Can I earn back the first? We'll see, I said, because I was done making women promises they did not ask me to keep. She volunteered at the clinic on Thursdays. She lasted longer than I expected. The first time I went to see the Maple Learning Garden, still a weed patch and a dream with a letterhead, she was there with a rake and an expression that suggested God had ordered humility online and shipped it to her. The garden grew by the inch. Teenagers came because someone told them not to. Retired men came because no one had asked them to build anything in a long time. A woman from the community foundation named Marisol, small and fierce as a lit match, found a grant we suddenly fit like a new coat. Leonard came on Saturdays and weeded with surprisingly delicate hands. I sat on a folding chair and handed out popsicles and repeated like a catechism. No one is allowed to be invisible here. Summer rolled into itself like bread. I learned to climb my porch steps one at a time without feeling like an amateur. I let the home health aide go, then hired her back for 2 mornings a week because she liked to dust, and I liked to watch someone else care for this place with reverence and Windex. Ethan showed up every Sunday again with bagels, this time sliced, and not because he assumed I didn't own a knife, but because he had learned that ready isn't the same as presumptuous. He told me about people he met at the food pantry whose names he found he could not forget. He used the phrase, "I was wrong," without choking on it. He asked me once if I believed in redemption. I told him I believed in practice. The Maple Learning Garden had its first event in September. We called it Harvest and Hear. People pulled carrots from soil like revealing a magic trick. We hired a man with a trombone to play What a Wonderful World badly and with so much heart it improved everything. The Astoria Daily Times ran another article with a photo that made me look like the beating heart of something larger than myself. An old student of mine, now a woman with gray roots and big laugh lines, hugged me so hard my hip protested. She said, "You always did know how to get us to behave without making us feel small." Rachel arrived late and stood off to the side, hands in her back pockets, eyes scanning the edge of the crowd the way a person does who is trying to learn when to clap. A woman with a cane glared at her and then turned away. Shame is not useful for long, but sometimes it's an excellent teacher for the first class. We had a microphone. I didn't want one. Leonard insisted, which was how he won most arguments. I spoke for 3 minutes, which was as long as I had to speak when I was principal too. Long enough to say the thing, short enough that the thing landed. I used to think justice was a gavel, I said into the feedback and the late sun. Turns out, at 74, justice is a garden. It's a place where you can put your hands into the same soil as your neighbor, and remember that neither of you is more expensive than the other. People clapped like they had been waiting all summer to use their hands for something besides worry. The trombone player hit a note that startled a pigeon. Kids ran past with carrots like swords. If I could have bottled the air in that moment, I would have used it to season the stew of every long winter of my life. Afterward, as people drifted and pushed folding chairs with their feet, Rachel approached. She didn't ask for a hug. She didn't offer one. "Can I bring the cider next week?" she asked. "You can," I said, "and you can stay and clean the cups after." She smiled without showing teeth. "Yes, ma'am." Visitors came and went. A man with thick fingers and the soft voice of someone who has learned how to speak in rooms where people are fragile told me his father had left his brother the house and left him silence. He wanted to change that pattern with his own kids. A kid with blue hair and a new paper schedule from the alternative school told me she wanted to learn how to make soup. A woman in a business suit said she'd been at Harbor Title the day I showed up and had never forgotten it. "I thought you were there to cause a scene," she said. "Instead, you rewrote the scene." "Sometimes you have to buy a different script," I said. November brought rain that fell sideways, and the presidency on television in rooms with flags. My hip ached in the damp, the way a broken heart aches when it hears a song from the year before last. I made stew and too much coffee and lists of donors with the kind of neat handwriting that can make your whole life feel legible. I sat at the kitchen table and made a budget. People think gardens are free. They demand rakes and new hoses after the old ones split, and a fence so the dog down the block won't claim the kale for himself. One night, I woke at 2 with a thought like a knock. What if I wrote down what had happened? Not like a book for a bookstore, not like an article, but like a letter to the women who would be 74 in years I wouldn't live to see. I went to the living room and wrote on a legal pad with a pen that belonged to Henry once. I wrote the way you write when you finally stop trying to appear modest and decide instead to be honest. I wrote until the first light skimmed the maple leaves and my hip demanded to be heated and Kira's exercises demanded to be done. I called Allison at the paper and asked her if she'd help me edit. She said she would. She came over with a recorder and pointed at my mouth and told me to read what I'd written out loud. I did. And I heard the tremor people hear in their own voices when they say their name at a microphone for the first time, and it sounds bigger than the room. She helped me carve and polish. We printed copies and left them at the clinic and the garden and the senior center. People pressed them to their chests like church programs. Fort Lauderdale did not get their vacation home. Ethan and Rachel moved to a smaller apartment with a window that looked at a tree like ours does. They started eating breakfast together again. Rachel called me once and cried for 5 minutes and laughed for one and told me she had not been sleeping, but now she did. You can fit a lifetime into a sandwich of confession and laughter if you hold it right. Christmas arrived like it always does, far too quickly and then not quickly enough. Ethan brought a small tree because you can't wrestle a big one right now, Mom. I let him be right. We decorated it with the mismatched ornaments that only make sense to the people who put them on, including the clay star Henry made in night school that looks like a misshapen pastry. I baked cinnamon rolls and forgot the salt, and we ate them anyway because grief loves sugar, and we wanted to feed it without inviting it to stay. In January, I fell on the ice on the back steps and did not break myself open again. I took it as a sign that a person can learn twice. I hired a kid from the high school to shovel. He texted ahead to ask if Miss Briggs wanted him to do de-icer too, and the politeness of men who are not yet men still has the power to make me cry. Spring stretched like a cat that had been sleeping on the dryer. The garden burst. We hired Marisol officially after she kept volunteering herself into a job. She did budgets with the precision of a surgeon and coaxed kids into the tomato rows like a magician. She suggested a Saturday series called Fix What You Can Workshops, where young people taught old people how to use their phones, and old people taught young people how to cook eggplant without making it sad. One morning, I found Ethan standing in the driveway, peering at the maple like it had said something to him. He had a thermos and a face that had aged in the right direction by 6 years in 6 months. "What?" I asked. "I learned how to prune," he said, sheepish as a child confessing to learning a curse word. "The garden guy showed me. If you let me, I can help shape it without hurting it." "Gently," I said, then handed him the pole trimmer, because love without trust is just a well-lit room you don't enter. He took off the dead limbs and left the reaching ones. The tree looked lighter, like it had been carrying a conversation it didn't need anymore. We bagged the branches together the way we used to bag leaves when he was 10, and believed it was a chore so important the president might call to thank him. "Do you think Dad would hate me?" he asked. Just like that, because there are questions you cannot prepare to hear. "No," I said. "Your father had a short fuse and a long memory. He'd be mad for a long time and love you longer." He nodded, and I saw the man I raised again, the one who had gotten quiet on the night he brought home his first F and then asked for help because pride had finally become boring. In July, the Maple Learning Garden became official, with a sign and a grant and a bench with Henry's name on it because he'd sat through too many recitals not to deserve a seat. People brought jam. A woman named Judy made tomato sandwiches for everyone and disobeyed the one-per-person rule we had taped to the folding table because generosity doesn't care about rules when the tomatoes are at their peak. That afternoon, a girl with freckles across her nose like constellations took my hand and said, "I didn't know old people could win." I squeezed her fingers and said a sentence I had not planned. "We don't win, honey. We live long enough to see how the game works." She nodded, like I had handed her something heavy she'd been carrying without understanding its shape. The clinic saw a rise in calls. Leonard trained 3 younger attorneys to answer them. We held an event in the library and called it Ask Before You Act, and I watched as people of all ages learned to say the sentence, "I need time to think about that," without apologizing for it. The church basement where the clinic lived smelled like old coffee and moral courage. Rachel poured cups and did not try to fix anything that didn't ask her to. On the 1-year anniversary of the day at Harbor Title, Ethan brought me a lemon bar. He held it like an offering. "Do you want to go down there?" he asked, "just to look at the building and laugh?" "No," I said, then thought and smiled. "Maybe just to look and breathe." We stood on the sidewalk in front of the fake columns. A young couple with a stroller walked past with a sleepy baby and a dog the size of a roast chicken. The title officer walked out and saw us and waved like a neighbor. She had the weight of a year in her hair. She said she had adopted a foster teenager. She said she had started using phrases in emails like, "What does your mother want?" and "Should we ask her?" She said I had made her job harder and better. We drove home with the windows down. The river looked like a sheet of hammered metal. Boats hunkered at the docks like dogs waiting to be let loose. The house turned its face toward us respectfully, the way a house should. Ethan parked and did not turn off the engine. "Mom," he said, "I want to talk to you about something." I braced because old women learn to brace even when the weather is perfect. "Rachel and I are expecting," he said, his voice small and broke open, like he had found the child in his own body and was reporting back with astonishment. "She's 12 weeks. We wanted to wait to tell you until it was sure. We want to do this right." I have never been good at crying gracefully. My face gets blotchy. My nose insists on participating noisily. I cried anyway. "You will," I said, "because right isn't a destination, it's how you walk." He laughed, partially to keep from crying the kind of tears mothers recognize. "Will you—" "No," I said, and his eyebrows flew up, and then I grinned so big my teeth felt exposed to weather. "I will not become your free childcare, but I will babysit when it's joy for me, not a job. I will bring casseroles when you're too tired to boil water. I will show that child how to put in a garden and how to say no in a complete sentence." "That's perfect," he said, and his relief was a kind of love. The baby arrived, and her name was June, because Rachel said she wanted a month that grew things. She had Ethan's eyes and Rachel's mouth, and a cry that sounded like a sob but nicer. I fell in love with her the way a person falls in love with the exact temperature of a certain day at the beach. I held her at the garden under the maple while Marisol pretended to be stern about rules, and teenagers pretended not to care about babies, and everyone cared very much. Sometimes I look at June and imagine her at 74, with hair the color of my own, and a spine like a stringer of fish, thin, strong, honest. I imagine her saying something with my voice, and her own, and a third thing in between. I pray I will be there long enough to teach her how to rearrange her face when someone mistakes kindness for permission. On the anniversary of Henry's death, I made soup and set a place at the table I never do, a simple thing that looks like a trick. I didn't talk to him, I don't see ghosts, but I told the air what had happened in a year. I told the air Rachel kept showing up. I told the air Ethan learned how to carry shame without letting it carry him. I told the air that the newspaper stories had made other stories possible in other houses with other people who had thought they were alone. I told the air that the scooter in the garage the neighbor kid had wanted was his now because the garage needed to be less a museum and more a promise. It took me until 74 to realize the best kind of revenge is a future someone else can live in. I didn't sell my house. I sold their greed. And when the papers were signed, different papers with words like trust and remainder and community, I gave my family back something they hadn't earned but could learn to deserve. Not money, not a deed, dignity. One night, I woke with that sense you have sometimes that the world is holding its breath. I shuffled to the back door and listened. The river breathed, the maple creaked, a fox trotted along the fence line and did not see me. I stood there for a while with my hand on the latch, feeling how the house held me and how I held the house, and I thought, a secret is only safe until it meets a woman who gets up in the night and turns on the light. The phone buzzed on the table like a startled bee. A text from Rachel. June won't stop crying. Can I call? I texted back, yes. The phone rang and I answered and listened to both of them, mother and daughter, wind themselves down. I told Rachel the trick Henry's mother taught me. The rhythm of a heart is a lullaby if you keep your breathing steady. I told her to hum not a song but a certainty. She did. The baby quieted, then hiccuped, then sighed a little sigh like a leaf falling down. You're good at this, Rachel whispered. I am, I said. I learned. I remember. We sat in the quiet for a moment, 3 people of 3 ages in 3 rooms inside a house I had refused to sell. Eleanor? Rachel said, barely audible, the word almost floating away. Yes, I said. Thank you for not giving up on me, she said. I did, I said, because the truth is a gift if you wrap it in love. I gave up on who you were being. Then you decided to be someone else that I never gave up on. The maple rustled an amen. The house breathed confirmation. The river went about its business. I went back to bed and slept with the kind of ease people mistake for luck when it's really practice. When spring came again, the garden burst a second time with that repeatable miracle that makes even cynics soften. We built a little free library in the corner out of old fence boards. A kid painted a sign that said, "Take what you need." Another kid added, "And leave what you can." People obeyed not because of the signs, but because they wanted to belong to something that made sense. On the day the library went up, Ethan stood beside me and pressed my hand, and without looking at him, I knew what he was thinking. He was thinking about harbor title and Rachel's roses, and the way his voice had sounded when he realized someone might write about him in the newspaper for reasons he'd prefer they didn't. He was thinking about how small he had felt standing next to a woman in a wheelchair, rolling into a lobby like a verdict. I squeezed back. "We're okay," I said. He nodded, a little childish in the good way, and went to help a woman with a cane reach the top shelf. There are moments, if you're lucky, when you feel your life click. It doesn't smooth out. It doesn't stop being complicated. But the big gears catch and turn and move the smaller gears along, and you realize you built something with your years that might just deserve the name legacy. People think legacy is marble. Sometimes it's a wooden bench with a plaque on it. Sometimes it's a folder at a law office. Sometimes it's a little girl named June who will grow up knowing the difference between a favor and a theft. I walk slower now. I nap more. I keep the lemon bar recipe on a card near the stove for Ethan to find when I'm gone, even though he prefers bagels. I kept one of Henry's sweaters and gave the rest to a shelter where men learn how to be men without forgetting that once they were boys. If you came to my house on a Tuesday in August and stood under the maple, you'd hear kids arguing about whether tomatoes taste like sunlight. You'd watch a teenager show a man my age how to open a locked phone. You'd hear me saying the same thing I say every day when someone thanks me for not giving up the house. I didn't. It gave me back to myself. And if you stood long enough, you might hear the whisper of a story you needed without knowing you did. A woman in a rehab facility, a nurse who said the wrong name in the right place, a son who learned to apologize like a grown-up, a daughter-in-law who learned that shame is a bridge and not a home, a lawyer who remembered ethics are just love in a suit, and a house that refused to let itself be turned into someone else's shortcut. People ask me if I regret anything. I tell them, regret is like rain. We're all going to get wet, so you might as well plant something that needs it. I regret not learning earlier the kind of no that sets people free. I regret trusting people to read my silence instead of my sentences. But I do not regret the day I rolled into harbor title, like an old ship making a last correct voyage. I do not regret the garden. I do not regret the fund. I do not regret the way Rachel's voice sounds when she says my name without forcing it into a tone she thinks I want to hear. A house cannot keep our secrets. It can, however, become the place we go when we want to stop pretending we have any. In that sense, my house is honest. It holds a life. It holds a map. It holds the bench where I will sit in good shoes with my granddaughter the first time she reads her own name out loud and laughs at how it feels in her mouth. And when I'm gone, the house will belong to the children and the old women and the lawyers in cheap shoes and the men who plant things. It will belong to anyone who believes dignity isn't just a word for speeches, but something you can grow and water and share. I once thought the best punishment for a thief was a lock. I understand now. The best punishment for a thief is a world where there's nothing worth stealing that can't be had by asking first. That's what I built, with Leonard's help and Ethan's work and Rachel's stubbornness and Henry's sweater draped over the back of a chair. That's what the Maple Learning Garden smells like on a warm day, a mix of tomatoes and apologies and futures. It smells like something we'll all want a second helping of without taking more than our share. So, if your own story comes to a hallway where you hear your name spoken like a transaction, if you feel the floor tilt and the stitches tug and your hands begin to tremble, do not think you are an old woman with nothing left but a signature. You are the principal of your own life. You have a spine and a lawyer and a house that knows your voice. You have a garden waiting for you to put your hands in. You have a sentence that begins, "I don't think so." Stand up slowly if you must. Take your walker and your breath and your name. Go where the truth can hear you. Say it. And when they ask you to wait while they figure out what to do about you, smile. Tell them you already did.